Hey friends, this is Madam Onça, and I am making you a synopsis of the class I taught earlier today. We used Google Hangouts, and it was pretty functional until once I got the hang of it. But of course, it did not allow me to record it. It requires a whole other app to do that, and or a subscription and so forth. So I'm going to continue to try to find a way to do this that is accessible to everyone and affordable for me. So what I'm going to do right now is give you a quick synopsis of what we covered today. So today in our Witchy 101 Tarot Basics, I basically strove to give a quick history, very quick history of the tarot, and mostly we're exploring the structure of the cards. I also found a hilarious quote from 1450 from a pastor speaking against the tarot, and we'll get to that. So hilariously quotable. This is what we find. The tarot comes to us through hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, it shows up maybe around the 1200s, something like that, in Italy. You are welcome to believe whatever you want about the historic provenance of the tarot. Some people believe that it is from the Library of Alexandria in Egypt that burned. Some people believe that it's records from Atlantis. I don't know, maybe it was created by the reptile people that secretly run the government. But whatever you want to believe. I personally, being interested in science, I like to lean into what we have in terms of documentation. And for that, again, we find ourselves looking at the inventories of rich people in Italy, you know, maybe around 1200. And Mary K. Greer, who I speak highly of every time I do a talk about tarot, is one of the preeminent academics and scholars on the subject of tarot, and she can give you much more in-depth work there. I do want to mention that there is an unfortunate conflation between the tarot and the Romani, i.e. the gypsy people. First of all, don't use the word gypsy. It's not your word to use unless that is your heritage. For everybody else, it's essentially a slur, and you need to get it out of your vocabulary right now, as challenging as that may be for some folks. But there's this piece of Orientalist fantasy about the charlatan fortune teller and the appearance of the Roma in Egypt and tarot cards all being interconnected. And that is a piece of fantasy, so you can just let that notion go right now. The cards were actually there first in Europe. The two things never really overlapped at the time. So tarot arrives, it evolves as a game, and everything I've read indicates that it was a game called Taroki. Out of that parent form, we get the modern tarot, which we'll talk more about what a traditional tarot deck is these days, and the modern playing cards. They are the same. They're the same art, the same tool. The difference being that tarot cards have an extra set of cards that are built in, and they are called the triumphs, or for short, they've been called the trumps. That is not a word I choose to use anymore in that context, but the cards have five suits rather. We've got the four that you see in the modern playing cards, and that is something like spades, clubs, diamonds, and hearts. So we have an analog for that in the modern tarot. And then there are the major triumphs, or the major arcana, as they're also called, the major secrets. And those are all the fancy ones that make it into the movies: the lovers, the death card, the devil card. And those are the ones that this preacher that I read from 1450 was speaking in revilement. He said, they are called the triumphs because creating them was the greatest triumph of the devil, as a way to build a ladder with 21 rungs. There's 21 cards, 21 rungs that leads to hell. Personally, I think that is hilarious. He put a lot of love and effort into creating that etymological argument. So funny. But these days we mostly call them either the major and minor trumps, or more often the major and minor arcana. So we will explore more about what is in the majors in a later session, because again, this is a quickie synopsis. In the remaining, the minors, what we see is, again, what we have in a modern playing deck, essentially. We have ace, these are the pip cards, they are to say the numbered cards, ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10s. And then we have the people cards, also called the court cards or the nobles. Again, Mary Kay Greer has a great book about that called Understanding the Tarot Court. We'll talk a little bit more about them as well, but I will say that in my opinion, the people cards are the most challenging to read in the deck. It's not the majors, because they are like giant emojis. They are big life lessons or events written large, like in neon. The day-to-day, those pip cards, the ace through 10s, they tend to be more of like the, what do I do at work? What do I do in my relationship? What really is motivating me here when I make these choices? Those are really like personal day-to-day things. Those other ones are like a giant comic book version of, of your life, and they're not that hard to read. So we talked about, in the session earlier, we talked about what the numbers mean. I am not a great scholar of numerology by any means. There's gematria, there's a whole business to that. But I can say, as a reader, the first thing I do, cards are laid out, I look to see if there's a lot of one suit. Let's say we've laid out 5 cards. If it's almost all pentacles, you would say, oh, there's a lot of one theme here. We're speaking to one area of your life. Likewise, if there's a lot of the same number, if you go, I only laid out 5 cards and 3 of them are 7s, that would tell me something. And I encourage you to look for those patterns as you learn to read. So here's my speed synopsis of what those numbers mean. Ace, that is the foundational element of the suit. That is why in my card they are literally pictured as like a vulva, as a Vesica Pisces. It is you're standing in the doorway of the future, and should you choose to step forward or swing open the saloon doors, as it were, then you'd be stepping into a fresh adventure relative to that suit. Depending on the ace, depending on the suit, that could look like different things. It might be the beginning of a project. It might be a renewed sense of emotional availability to be authentic with yourself and other people. It may literally be a house, a business, a baby. It can definitely have a fertility element. There's always a sense of stepping forth into making a choice to make something concrete. The two is the part when you've stepped through the door. This is the part where we learn to relate to the element, what that suit is about, decisions, ambition, emotion, whatever. Relative to reality, like out of the hypothetical. You're here out in the actual world, interacting with other people, with consequences. So it's very much a sort of baby steps in the area of that question. We get to 3. 3 is a little bit more, excuse me, a little bit more accomplished, a little bit more stable. And so it's not just you and other, it's you and many. So this is where we start dealing with more variables, more people, more demands upon us to be versatile and flexible. We get to the 4. When you see 4s coming up in a reading, they are stable. There's a reason that cows have 4 legs and tables have 4 legs. It represents in the Western imagination like a plateau. So it's not a finished place of evolution, but is the place where you get to stop, catch your breath, reflect, look down over what you have already climbed or accomplished and go, look at me. Is this where we're at? Then we get to the 5. My teacher, Kate Nordstrom, who is a great reader, teacher, mystic, and also painter. You can look her up under Kate Nordstrom. Her work is very surreal, I would say. She had a real aptitude for teaching and was very patient with me, and she described the 5s as the cards of chaos, the chaos cards. When you get 5s usually mean disruption. Whatever you thought you had established by way of rhythm, pattern, lifestyle, understanding, the tables are being flipped, and it's time to sink or swim, grow, or be overwhelmed. Then when we see 6s come up in a reading, 6s are an even more stable table. 6s describe a new footing, and this time, whereas in 4 you may have felt accomplished, now you are more accomplished and wise. You've got some life experience. You've dealt with conflict as well as learning. So 6s tend to be, again, another place you can sort of catch your breath before the 7, which once again my teacher referred to as the vortex cards. Everything you knew, once again, is thrown up in the air, and it's time to do. The 7s are generally about evaluation. They're really looking around and saying, Is that all there is? What was all the fuss? Or, I love this, totally worth fighting for. So 7s are evaluative because they're challenging. 8s are the extra stable table. And in many times, I would say that when the 8s come up in those minors, in those, ace through 10 cards, the 8s are sort of the last hurrah of stability, almost. They're great. They're so stable that a lot of times there's an element of giving, sharing, deepening of knowledge of self. 9s are sort of the pinnacle, I would say. If a suit were a banana that is getting ripe. Ace, it's too green to really consider food. The 10 is where it's so mushy, it really needs to go into banana bread. It's too mushy to even use in a smoothie. Whereas the 9 is like that perfect level of ripeness. The 10 gets a little bit overwhelmed. It's like succumbing to the compost principle. 10 is where the suit has reached, it's like the suit is now turned up to 11. So if it's swords and the cards tend to be painful, it's super painful. If it's cups and the cards tend to be happy and joyful and connected, it's almost a deluge of connection. Like it's more wonderful or more horrible or more challenging or more ambitious to the point where you're burning yourself out. All of the 10s are, they're a lot. Then we jump up to the people cards. Once again, I want to recommend Mary Greer's book, Understanding the Tarot Court. Is that what they called? Understanding the Tarot Court. I did the cover for it. And it's a good book. It's basically a workbook, playbook to help you get a handle on how to read the people cards, because they represent an element of challenge. When people cards come up in a reading, they represent always an aspect of yourself that you need to be aware of or lean into, and often other people. For example, if somebody gets, again, we've got 5 cards on the table and 4 of them are people cards, I'm going to say that's statistically very unlikely. Either how many voices are in your head telling you what to do, or how many people are impacting this decision. They definitely represent, again, something in yourself, and also often an outside force. What the people cards are called varies hugely from suit to suit. Again, as with the minors, with those pips, where they're usually called swords, but they're sometimes called blades. They're usually called wands, but they're sometimes called staves. They're usually called cups, but sometimes they're called chalices. They're usually called pentacles, but sometimes they're discs or stones. It really depends on the sort of aesthetic and ideology of the creator. This is especially true with the people cards. Typically, you have something like a king, you have something like a queen, you have something like a knight or a prince, which is sort of like a go-get-'em version of the youthful aspect, and then we have something like a like a princess or a page. There's more of a what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say novitiate, like a youthful seeking quality, let's say, for lack of another word at the moment. I would not worry about the gender. Gender is over. The writer, Roger Tilley, talking about tarot and the evolution of tarot, he pointed out that you cannot divorce the art from the culture of the time that the art was made in. And that is certainly true with the tarot, where you have to go, when these cards were made, kings and queens were a thing. Nobility was a thing. Class and sex and race were a thing in a way that is different from what they are now, and we are working real hard to deconstruct those things and still maintain the integrity of the cards as a system. So don't get attached to the gender binary. It's just a little hard for us to figure out as artists how to move beyond that. But what we see in the cards is that king-like person, whatever it is, whatever their gender, maybe they're a drag king, that king-like person represents leadership in the area of that suit, say swords, cups, pentacles, whatever, leadership, depth, and coordinated effort in the larger sphere. The queen type personality, again, maybe it's drag queen, in this context usually means something like stewardship, guardianship, and care in a more personal, like interpersonal realm, interpersonal systems. I know it's super gendered, but I promise we can get through this. And then the seeker is usually, or the knight is usually somebody on a horse, or in the Thoth deck, one of them is he's on a lion, or they're on an eagle. It is, I always think of it as a teenager with a car. It's like when this card comes up, it's describing somebody with passion, drive, enthusiasm, maybe not all the facts. And there's a time when you have to stop armchair theorizing and just put the hooves to the road in order to learn more. So that card describes that, like, I gotta get out there and try it. I know I don't know everything, but I don't even begin to know what I don't know. Let's go learn. And the seer, or the page, or the princess, whatever it may be in the decks that you choose to work with, typically represents more of a studious, like I'm learning about it, I'm receiving information, I am tender and porous and totally dialed into whatever this suit is about. So it can be, again, it can be studious, it can be intuitive, it can be inquisitive. The thing about these people cards, the glare on my glasses is driving me crazy. The thing about the people cards is that they are, you can make broad generalizations about what queens are like, or seekers are like, or whatever. And that will serve you up to a point, because the tarot evolved without systems. It was just there as a game. All of this other symbolism has accreted onto it over centuries, which is why the symbolism has to shift to suit the times. And you can make a generalization about what kings are like or whatever, but the fact is, once you get to know those 4 kings, or you get to know those 4 seers, you'll understand them much better, perhaps, than you do if you look at them as a group, because it's kind of like a stereotype. If you say all drag queens are like this, there are some things that you might say are true about all drag queens. You could say all tarot queens are like this. But, beyond the stereotype, there's a lot of nuance, and that nuance is really what's going to make your readings tick as more than hypothetical. And that's just spending some time and getting to know them. The other thing that we talked about today, obviously I took more time in all of these subjects because we met for an hour. The other thing we talked about today, all of those suits refer to an element, and this varies from system to system. Some people who work in the Asatru, like the Viking spirituality tradition, it's a little different. Maybe the deck that you work with is a little bit different. But in a traditional system, often the Western elements apply, the classic Western elements. So wands are fire, passion, willpower, ambition, drive. Swords are intellect, communication, ideas, boundaries, and the element of air. Pentacles are health and wealth. They are the element of earth, the world of practical things, stuff. And for my gamer folks, I like to say, they are gold coins and hit points. So it's like the practical material you have to work with. And again, the element of earth, like earthiness, literally the world incarnate in the meat. And then the last one is cups, is water, emotions, relationship, authenticity. For some people, it's also spirituality and creativity, depending where your spirituality lives at. So those classical elements all, that is how they often are. Again, in some deck you may find that the wands represent air or something else. Because, again, this is an evolving tradition that has come to us over hundreds and hundreds of years, possibly from aliens or Atlanteans or whatever you choose to believe. The moral of the story is that, it's something that's been co-created by, millions of people over hundreds of years, and there is no one way. There is no governing board that decides how things are, and there shouldn't be. Not for that, because monopoly is often bad for the arts and for philosophy. The other bit that we talked about at the end today with the cards also is you can let go of a bunch of the rules you've been taught, because they are not real. They're not real rules. They can be traditions, and you can choose to be empowered by and excited by tradition if you want to. And say, like for example, for me, when I read cards, mostly I do it in my own way, sort of the way I was taught by Kate, sort of my own way. And there's one thing that I do, and I say, and this is the thing that we do to connect us to tradition, because people have been doing this part for at least 100 years. But different schools of spiritual thought, maybe you're completely not spiritual, you're a non-theistic person who wants to do cards, and you're just coming at it from a psychological point of view, like really how you choose to read the cards in terms of your personal ritual, as it were, or your practice, really comes down to what gets you in the headspace. If you're a very ritually minded person or a very OCD person and you have to have things a certain way in order to feel able to sort of tune into the frequency, do that. If you're more of a casual kitchen witch type, maybe you don't need a velvet tablecloth laid down on the right hour of the right day, and you've got them wrapped in a silk bag. Maybe you just wipe the crumbs off, and wave over it with your mystical instead of an athame. You've got a steak knife because you were just buttering a bagel. I mean, whatever it is that does it for you. Some of the things you can let go of. You are welcome to buy a deck. You don't have to wait around for somebody to give you one. You don't have to steal one, any of the horrible fake traditions that have come to us over time. You can wrap it in a bag of silk or velvet, or keep it in a wooden box, or you can keep it in the back of your jeans pocket. There's no absolutes there. You do what you need to do in accordance with how you are wired. That's totally liberating for you. You do what you need to do. If your cards feel sticky and icky with other people's energy, you can choose. Let other people touch your cards or not. I always let people touch my cards until this week, when it's not energetic cooties, but literal cooties that we're needing to be aware of. Energetic cooties, you can clear out. We've got systems for that. Literal cooties in the form of COVID-19, I have taken my deck and put it in the closet, and I'm going to leave it there for a month and not touch it. It's in quarantine, both spiritual and viral. Energetically, you can clear your cards out by indulging in any number of woo-woo practices that make you feel good. You can sit them in a bowl of salt. You can restack them sort of back to the mystical reset from, the first card to the last card in the deck, from 0 to 78. You may choose to smudge or seine them in various ways that are consistent with a considered approach to what is appropriate culturally for you and in consideration of other people in terms of cleaning the bad energy out. Or you can decide that sort of thing's not real and it's not a real problem, and don't worry about it. I think they're coming back. That's the end of my 20-minute window. I'll post this for you. I hope it helps. Next time, I will find a way to record the whole thing. Blessed be.